Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. As a mental health professional, you care for others, and the Complex Trauma Training Center is committed to caring for you. We are thrilled to introduce our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Therapists often focus so much on learning skills to use with clients that we don't leave space for ourselves. This interactive experiential program offers an immersive learning environment designed to cultivate space for ourselves in our professional role. As Viktor Frankl taught, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Starting February through December 2025, we will host 6 online sessions designed to cultivate space for self-care and self-discovery. We will be exploring the obstacles that stand in your way of being the most present, heartful, and effective therapist possible. Together, we will explore in a safe, inclusive, and supportive environment with the intention to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the SPACE program. It's time to care for you. And now for our interview. Brianna Wu is a former video game developer turned Politico. Best known for the 2014 Gamergate scandal, where women in the game industry were targeted with extreme harassment. Wu ran for Congress and is the host of Dollcast. Please enjoy this conversation with Brianna Wu. All right, I am sitting here with Brianna Wu. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
It's so exciting to be here. You know, I get a lot of media requests. I've never gotten one specifically about trauma before, so it's a big day for me.
It's a big day for us. We're so excited you're here.
Oh my
Thank you
goodness.
for taking the time. So, Brianna, I'm going to just dive right in and asking you, what would you like our listeners to get during our time together today?
Gosh, as uncomfortable as it is to think that my life could inspire anyone except to not make certain decisions, I don't know. I hope it will, stuff that I'm saying will connect and be useful to people. Maybe if they have a trans child, they will know they can end up relatively normal. Or if you're trans yourself, you can know there's a good life waiting for you out there if you'll deal with some tough stuff. So that would be my hope.
I love it. Awesome. That's a beautiful intention. So can we start? I know you said you get lots of media requests and nothing usually around trauma. And so I'm wondering, can you tell us just a little bit about you, your background, where you are in the world, the good stuff?
Oh boy. I've had a really interesting career. Most people started off knowing me for Gamergate, which was a scandal in the game industry about 10 years ago. It was kind of the start of this playbook we see with basically hunting people online when they have opinions you don't like and sending them death threats, rape threats, going through everything they've ever said, trying to destroy them, all that great stuff that is a fantastic political development. I ran for Congress. That turned out pretty well. You know, I've been a political operative for years. I've been relatively involved in the Israel-Palestine discourse. And, I came out finally after 20 years publicly trans a few months ago. It's never been that I've thought people couldn't figure out I was trans sometimes. It was that I didn't want it to be the focus of what people were thinking about with my work. I just wanted to go on and blend and have a normal life as best as I could. But I really came to the conclusion that if we didn't change direction on some things, we were going to lose everything. So that's kind of why I've been a bit more vocal about that.
Okay. Amazing. Yeah. Like you named, you've got your hand in a lot of different, I don't know, what's the saying? Pots? I don't know what you're...
I've had a dynamic life, maybe we would say
You have a dynamic life. I love that.
Yes.
And being in politics and with Gamergate, and also this piece around being trans, but also not wanting that necessarily to be the focus. And recently understanding that it's helpful to have even more discourse around that.
That's what, from my point of view, there's some people that would disagree.
Well, I'm on the camp of agreeing, so we're going to talk about the things. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about just your history of how, because you named trauma as a part of your history. So what part of that feels relevant for you to talk about today?
Well, I guess, I think it really starts where most queer stories start, which is when I realized something was really, really wrong with me. I only get vague memories of it, but I have no memory of ever not desperately wanting to be a girl when I was much younger. It was literally all I could ever think about. And I get these memories of like them separating us by gender in kindergarten and just being overwhelmed with shame about that, or wanting to play clapping games with the girls in my class, or wanting my hair to be long and pretty. And it was really incredibly difficult. I was rereading 1984 recently, and there's a scene where the protagonist gets taken to room 101 for torture. And Orwell talks about the way you really break a spirit in someone is you make them decide to kill what they really truly love. And he's sitting there with the love of his life. He's saying, tear Julia's face off, kill her, break her body. I don't care, just save me. It's very much what a trans childhood is like, because there's a part of you that feels so real and important to you and is just begging to be nourished. And you have to let those parts die to survive. And it sends so many of us off in these wildly painful directions that take decades to get over. And I can barely touch it today. Like, it's really been extremely difficult. So I think that's where my story kind of starts.
And, regardless of what anyone's experience is, I hope that everyone can have an open heart to this piece that you just said. Like, there's parts of us that a lot of us as kids felt like we had to have die in order to survive. I mean, that is a really powerful statement. And I know a lot of people are going to resonate with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, why did you say yes to doing this interview? That's honestly where my brain goes, because what about it, the idea of transforming trauma is resonant for you?
Well, it's not that I think I have any illusions that I've mastered anything. What I am increasingly aware of is that there is a lack of public information about what the cost is of being trans, of what that pathology looks like. Even as we're recording this, I'm on about 4 hours of sleep because last night J.K. Rowling decided to go after me personally on Twitter, which made my phone blow up all night. And I got a ton of harassment and other threats, which is just part of my life. And, I read a lot of these comments from people that just frankly want trans women like me to stop existing. And I think there's a real lack of empathy from the public about what it's like for people like me or what we really want.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know earlier I said it's not your responsibility to educate me or anyone else. And also you kind of stepped into that. You said, well, I'm a public figure and you're choosing that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah. I really wonder if it's a mistake I made being a public figure. I mean, it certainly has not made me happier or made my life easier. I find it so interesting. Like, you look at these studies and these kids today, like being a YouTuber or a celebrity is the thing they want most. And I remember, 10, 15 years ago where no one knew who I was. My life was so much better in so many ways. So I don't know, but it's kind of like you can't unring that bell. That egg is not getting unscrambled. And I think I just have to make the most of my choices, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That especially lands for me in this model, the NARM model that I work with and that many in our community are trained in. Agency is a huge, piece of the work, the therapeutic work. And so I appreciate you naming, you can't unring that bell. I just have to make the most of my choices and moving forward.
Right.
And
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing I noticed, because I did, this morning I got up and I checked your Twitter, your X again, and I did notice the piece with J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
And so,
what did you think of my response? I thought I handled it pretty skillfully, to be honest.
I thought it was very well spoken and reasonable. And I hope if anyone is curious and goes and checks out that thread, can see you're really wanting to open up civil discourse.
Yeah.
It's so important. I feel like everything's so polarized these days and people can't have a different opinion, like you said, without being attacked. So I really appreciated the way you approached it. And I'm curious what you're noticing in this moment.
Well, I mean, the thing is with J.K. Rowling, after Gamergate, I certainly understand what it's like to have thousands of people sending death threats to my door and harassing me. And I've been horrified by the response of trans Twitter towards her. And please don't get me wrong. I do not like many of her opinions. I think she's become increasingly radicalized, as many people on the internet have been. But at the same time, the answer to that is not to tell someone you're going to kill them, rape them, murder them, which is routine from my community now, unfortunately. So it's like, when I think through the lessons I learned from Gamergate, which was in many ways having to fight becoming the thing that was attacking me and eventually stepping away from that brink, I can see that happening to her. And I guess it's like I have empathy for where she is right now. And I would hope that the same with a lot of, these gender critical or TERF, people in the UK. It's not like I'm not in my 40s and I don't understand the collection of indignities you get as a woman as you get older. Like, I very much understand this. It's not like I haven't had men belittle me in my career consistently over the last 20 years, or I don't, understand how your value to society changes as you age. It's not like I don't understand having to fight for every piece you get. So it's so frustrating because I can see the TERF gender critical point of view, and there's validity in that, which I've tried to speak out against. But it just feels like you're in the middle of a firestorm because you've got on one side, trans people are in pain, and we're just looking for a society that will give us healthcare and dignity. And then on the other, you've got this justifiable feminist rage on the other with reasonable questions about policy towards children or, what access to women's spaces looks like. And there's an adult discussion we need to have that we're not having. But the problem is that's not interested in a conversation. It's increasingly interested in dehumanizing people. And I actually think like my unique experience has really positioned me to be a needed voice for moderation on this. It's something I feel a responsibility to do.
Yeah. Again, I just want to name, I feel really appreciative of the work you're doing, the nuance that you're able to hold, and these conversations that you're really inviting. And, people are going to do what they do and not always are willing to come to the table in a reasonable way. But I really appreciate how you're approaching those conversations and opening it up.
Or at least trying to with the skills I have.
Doing the best you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering in this moment, I'm feeling a little bit more curiosity just about you personally.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, when you've been in those deep trenches, what that's been like for you to emerge.
I want to be honest and say it's really taking a toll on me. I transitioned over 20 years ago, and there's so much trauma that goes along with that. And I've moved on as best as I can. I've been monogamously married to a man for 16, almost 17 years. I've had a good career. I've got a house. I have a good life for myself. But I think what is increasingly taking a toll is having thousands of people a day show up to my door, knocking and saying, you're a man, you're a freak, you're a degenerate, you're a cross-dresser, you're invading women's spaces. And it's, I'm an adult and I'm fairly good at tuning this stuff out. I'm very experienced at getting death threats, for instance. But it's just the volume of it and reading it consistently. I really worry it's changing the way I see myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm just really hoping folks can hear that there's a toll, there's a cost.
There is.
As you show up in these ways and all the advocacy and all the work that you do, it's wearing down on people and many people.
Well, you get it from both sides. Like, it's not like trans people are not very angry at me for trying to chart a course more down the middle. Right? I get called a traitor. I get stuff I'm taking out of context. I'll give you a very specific example. Look, I am in my 40s and I have enough friends with children to understand that if you're talking about someone's children in public school, this is something you need to tread very lightly. It's a lot more complicated than I thought when I was 20 years old. And there's a bill in California that basically says if a school is socially transitioning children, the parents need to know about this. You don't need to do it behind their back. And I really thought about this, and I'm like, well, on one hand, I know what it's like to be a closeted child, terrified that my parents are going to find out about me because I know they'll disown me, and they did. But on the other, it's like, I don't think it's good public policy to have our public school system basically facilitating a gender change and keeping parents in the dark. That's not a way for trans people to build trust. And if you believe, as I do, that those children need health care, it's not getting them the help that they need. So, I came out in favor of this bill. And it's just been swear to God war with the trans community day in and day out about that. And it's very frustrating because there's very little willingness to see any nuance there, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And I'm appreciating, something was coming up for me. I had heard about that bill and I kind of was curious too about like, oh, interesting. What are the implications?
Right.
What does this look like down the road? And I don't know, there's something that came up for me. Again, this is not my experience. As I'm not a trans person. So I want to be careful. I want to tread lightly. And also there's part of me that's like, if we do that and we communicate to a child, yes, this is a secret.
Yeah.
Your parents shouldn't know. Like there's something there that's missing. And I can absolutely see the points that you're making. And I really appreciate your willingness to even talk about that. Because I imagine it can be really, really difficult when you're walking that line down the center, that it kind of feels like, well, who can see any of the work that I'm doing?
That's right.
If you're being attacked from both sides.
That's right. So it does get you attacked from literally everyone here. So that's it's exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for naming that. So you've been doing this work. You've transitioned, you said, over 20 years ago or around.
I did.
And
I was the first trans woman to ever transition at the University of Mississippi, which, let me tell you, that was an adventure.
we haven't even talked about that. Growing up in the Deep South.
I did.
And what that was like for you. You also mentioned your family had
disowned me.
Yeah.
Threw me away like garbage. It was actually two families because I was adopted. So the first thing you learn in life is that your biological family didn't love you enough to keep you. And then, you're different and you keep a secret your whole life because you're terrified your parents aren't going to love you. And then they just throw you away, and so do your brother and sister. It's really been very lonely.
I just want to give a moment for that to land. And I really hope that people are having their hearts open in this moment for the work that you do and for what you've been through. Yeah. So I just want to have a real moment here with you and I, and we can edit anything and anything out here. But I just want to ask you a real question. How are you in this moment? I just want to make sure I'm not taking you anywhere that doesn't feel.
It's not like I don't feel this all the time.
I'm sure, yeah.
Especially in the holidays. Like Christmas is in just a few days, and it hurts.
Absolutely.
I mean, I wish people could understand. I didn't ask to be born this way. It was, I did a podcast with Andrew Sullivan a few days ago, and we were talking for him as a gay man. What it was like growing up, and he talks about like trying to hide his attraction to other boys. And it's like, I had all of that on top of wanting to be a girl on top of that. And it's like, there's this cost that, you can't act like yourself. So the first thing you learn to do is to play a series of parts from some stereotypes about gender that don't really fit you very well. And like, it's not normal to think about your childhood as like a part you played in a play, like a fake character. And, I didn't understand who I was until I transitioned. So it's just, I don't know. I wish my family could have, I know they understood the pain that I was in. And I know, like, I told them how I felt many times. And they couldn't acknowledge what I was or get me help. Which is, it's very painful.
There's part of me, and I don't know if this is the right question to ask or even a good question. Sure. What would a help have looked like for you? What would you have wanted?
I mean, just letting me act in a way that would have felt normal would have been just so helpful. Like, I remember this time, I think I was like 6 or 7. I was in great mood. And I'm walking through the house and I'm talking to mom, and I make some hand gesture like this, talking to her. It's just like a normal, I'm sure it looked very gay to her. And she just looks at me and snaps and goes, "Don't do that." And I remember in this moment thinking, oh no, I let my mannerisms slip. My mom's going to know what I want. And it's actually a really dangerous lesson for a child to get. The feeling joy around your parents puts you at risk. So, you learn to hide all of this. And, obviously it's hard to not, the amount of plastic surgery I've had to have to even pass as barely as I do, like, that's because I didn't have testosterone blockers or estrogen at a young age. I mean, that would have helped, but even just therapy, to have someone to talk to. Like, I must have sat there 1,000 times and wondered, like, do other people feel this way? Did they just hide it better than I do? Like, do they not feel like their bodies are broken and weird all the time? Like, I just felt so much loneliness. I cannot even communicate it to you, which is why I just shut down.
Mm-hmm. And I'm appreciating in this moment that you are sharing. You're not shutting down, but you're sharing really vulnerably. And I appreciate your willingness to go there. That experience that you illustrated, this moment of your mother snapping and you getting clear on, oh, I can't let my true self slip. I can't like be authentically me, because then she'll know. And and this isn't a safe space.
That's right.
And so that's landing for me, like for any parent, regardless, because we may or may not know. I mean, I have children and I may or may not know where, but hopefully just creating space for them to be their authentic selves. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Just the safety to show up in whatever authentic way.
I mean, it's not like I didn't tell them how I felt 1,000 times. I remember being very young and telling my mom I was worried I was going to go to hell because I wanted to be a girl so much. And she just, like, that's so obvious to me as an adult. Like, my dad's a surgeon. They know what this is. And the fact that they just chose to ignore that, I mean, it's very difficult.
So in the work that you've done in all these different spaces, I'm curious because you've named there's a cost, what has helped you to continue forward?
I don't have any insight on that. I think there's something about me that just, I've thought about this a lot lately. If sometimes the battles I choose to fight are me repeating these maladaptive strategies I had with my parents, where I'm so used to not being loved that I'm willing to go out and make career decisions that no one is going to like, which is helpful for society, but it doesn't really, it has a cost for you, I think I would say.
Yeah. And I'm understanding you've chosen, you're in a relationship, you're married.
Oh, yeah.
And that came up for me as you were saying that, because you are in a partnership. And so you've made lots of choices.
Sure. My husband's great. I never thought I'd get a boyfriend as a child, much less a fantastic, husband who makes lots of money and does important work and is, a celebrity in his own right, is drop dead sexy. Like, that's very exciting for me.
Yeah. So you are in connection, and you're naming, even as there's choices you've made because you've been so comfortable. Like, I can't remember how you said it, but it's like, you had this whole growing up of being, is rejected a word I can use?
Yeah,
I mean, you felt
fair.
rejected?
I think that's fair.
That you've professionally, you're in a lot of spaces where you find yourself being rejected by people who can't hold what you bring. Yeah. And so there's that. And also there's this relationship, this beautiful relationship that you're in with a man who's drop dead sexy.
This is amazing. I love Frank.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to get so emotional. I apologize.
I appreciate you being willing to be personal with us. So what can listeners, if we're holding this, and hopefully, again, our hearts are open and people can really hear that what you're sharing is, there's a cost when someone like yourself shows up and is willing to use your voice and speak out in advocacy for so many who maybe aren't able to use their voices or don't have the resources or don't have the support, that there is a cost. How can someone like me, how can I help in support of that?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I mean, just speaking with you really honestly, I mean, I don't mean to get political, but I really truly wonder if I'm going to have access to estrogen in the next 4 years, the way that things are going. Yeah, I wonder if my legal change to female, if that's going to be reconsidered. There's legislation in Texas to rescind that for trans women. And, there's a political project to stop me from using the bathroom right now. So I guess what I would hope people would see or think about would be, I understand there's a discussion about trans women in sports we need to have, but at the same time, like, I didn't ask to be born this way. Like, I literally went to a doctor, I got health care, and I just need people to see my humanity. Ultimately, I'm just trying to live my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of our listeners who are clinicians, who are therapists, or work in the mental health field, and I'm as well. And so what I'm taking away from this is like supporting this civil discourse and really holding nuance and just seeing folks' humanity and really listening and hearing what you're saying and hearing the costs.
Well, and taking action based on that,
Right.
I mean, I don't have children, so I've never donated to local school board races before, but, there are policies in effect that would be very damaging to children, just like the child I was. So I think, that there's just a wider public policy conversation that we need, and the extremes are not going to serve it. So I think it's all hands on deck. I need all the help I can get in just steering the conversation to normalcy again.
Yeah, thank you. That helps me again know the ways that I can take action, even something like when I'm in the polls and I'm voting. I mean, that's an important one, but there's lots of other ways too that we can show up and take action.
Of course.
So I'm curious, coming from a family where you were adopted and growing up in the South and being essentially excommunicated from your family or your culture, were there ways, because you named there were some maladaptive, what you termed as maladaptive ways. And I really, again, as a therapist, when working with folks, there can be a high level of shame around some of the ways that not just clients, but like myself, like we all find ways of surviving.
Sure.
That work in the moment, and then later, especially into adulthood when we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, like those strategies to survive are no longer serve us. And I wonder, as you just named that, how are some of the ways that you've maybe shifted those strategies? And I'm not speaking specifics. I'll let you talk about it in however way you want or don't want.
Sure. Well, I think, the way I coped with being trans from, 18 to 24 was doing every drug I could get my hands on. That was, I think, probably a suboptimal strategy. I found myself in a super rehab, like live at the hospital, have a whole team of therapists working on you rehab. I'll never forget the day I left. They were like, here are the stats. In 5 years, 90% of y'all are going to be right back here in addiction. And I'm like, I'm going to work as hard as I can to be part of that 5% there. And, I got clean. So that was something I've learned. But, to be honest, like so much of my addiction was the fact that I wasn't a woman. So when I got help, like my desire to do drugs largely went away. I think it has been a lifelong effort to unlearn some of these tendencies, like thinking reactively, being emotionally reactive in the moment, kind of trying to temper that more. That is very difficult. Like, where's the wisdom in really having fire and being, showing up very powerfully and very certain and kind of holding back more? Being more strategic. I think that's easier as you get older, but I don't know. I think so much of being trans is you constantly doubt your intentions or your judgment or your perception of things. So I never feel quite certain of that, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I just keep coming back to like, you kind of sped through it. This, like, I got out of rehab and I just worked really hard and then you moved on to the next thing. But I'm like, that is monumental.
Is it?
That's a big deal. And I'm wondering, like what really helped you? I mean, I know you're saying when you were able to transition, a lot of those strategies kind of quieted, or I don't know how you'd say it, but just the drug addiction, even if we're just talking about physiologically, the addiction, like how overcoming that, what really supported you in doing that?
Well, the fact that I was locked up in rehab with no access to drugs, that sure helped.
But you got out.
That's true.
And you knew the stats.
That's true. I mean, it was like I felt so much better once I wasn't on drugs. I was not eager to go back. But I think there's something about me that's just an iron willpower. One of my favorite things to do is marathon. And I think like when you lock on a goal and think through it and just ignore all input your body is telling you to do anything differently, I don't know. It's like sometimes when I want things, I just shut off the part of my brain that wants that and keep going.
Okay. So you found a way. So when you say marathon, you mean like running? You're a runner?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you learn to kind of choose which impulses, which output you're going to listen to in terms of your
that's right.
somatic experience. Okay. And obviously it sounds like you've worked with therapists, at least in rehab. Yeah. What's that like been for you? What can I ask? What has been really helpful in that process?
I found, one of the things I remember the most about rehab was group therapy. And I have to tell you, I did a program called the Professional Enhancement Program in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is where Tiger Woods went for his sex addiction. So this is the Rolls Royce treatment. And what they do is they bring you in and you sit there with a bunch of other drug addicts and you tell them your story. And then the drug addicts call you on all your bullshit. And I have to tell you that will make you see yourself a little bit more clearly when there are all these stories you've been telling yourself and you get that input from people. So that was very helpful for me.
What helps you take that in though? Because I imagine there would be some folks that they hear that and immediately the walls go up and they're not going to listen. Like, why do you think you allowed that to change, to shape?
It's relentless. Different? It's months of living at the hospital and getting hit again and again and again. So I don't know. Maybe it's something positive in me, but it was structured in a way where eventually you took those lessons. So yeah, that was very positive for me. And I think, I noticed this in the trans community a lot, that there's a tendency to treat clinicians as the enemy, which has never really made sense to me. It's like, if you're going to be there and you're going to be talking to someone, you need to take that seriously. Like, it's very easy to just tell yourself what you want to hear, but are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to look at some hard stuff and make some changes? I feel like I've always been amenable to that, if it makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I can appreciate what you're saying. Like, that would just be, how do I say this? I think that what you're naming is there's like a humility that you've cultivated around, the work. Like, if I'm going to be here, what do I actually want out of it? You're connecting again to that agency part. Like, there's something here I can get out of this.
That's right.
Yeah. Was there something else?
No, I'm just answering your questions.
Okay, I just was looking at your face and it looked like maybe there was something else there.
I guess it's always just funny to me if anyone's interested in any of this stuff. So I think it's just that amusement.
Well, I appreciate, another perspective. You have a totally different, place in the world where you're looking at things. Yeah. And I'm excited that I get to hear about a different viewpoint in the world.
It is exciting to hear my viewpoint as well.
It is. I'm enjoying this. And since you're here and I feel like you would tell it to me straight, Emily, you've got this totally wrong. Because I was having a conversation, this was a few years ago, with a friend who is in deep connection with someone who's a trans woman. Mm-hmm. And there was a conversation around intersex.
Ooh.
You said, ooh, like maybe you have some thoughts. But I'm just wondering how folks can't see there's this whole spectrum. And like, why can't we hold space for everyone and every experience?
Sure.
this is Emily really just showing how little I know. But I'm wondering if you can share, I don't know, anything about that.
Well, my husband has a PhD in bacterial genetics, and he was showing me a study the other day that he found. Basically, they had a very high N of trans women, and they took out the ones with comorbidities, and they gene sequenced all of them, compared them to a group of biological women and men, and looked for commonalities there. And what they found is there were a lot of common markers that trans women had with protein receptors related to both estrogen and testosterone.
Right.
Which, to be clear, we don't know what conclusions to draw from this yet, but it was a very recent study, and it's a large N, and it's methodologically sound. And I think it's reasonable to guess from that I probably process estrogen and testosterone differently than most natal males do. And what I can tell you is, for me, I remember so clearly during puberty, just feeling like testosterone was breaking my brain and making me feel stuff that was just otherworldly and unnatural and clouding my thinking. And the day I went on estrogen, it was like, I cannot tell you how many times I sat there and watched a romantic movie before I transitioned. And I'm like, I should be crying right now. And I could just feel nothing. I was just dead. And it's like you get on estrogen, and it's like going from having 4 colors to see the world with to a giant box of 64 Crayola crayons. And you can laugh at stuff, and it's like there's clearly some biological basis for why estrogen just agrees with trans women so much, and I don't know. I think, if anyone knows me, I'm a reasonably feminine person, and I hope they can see, there's no version of me where I'm a pro wrestler or I'm happy like that. It's just fundamentally not what I am.
Well, I asked the right person. I think you're the only person maybe that I could have felt like asking that question. I don't know. Again, there's so little that I know, and I'm not a scientist in that way, but I've always been so curious about what that experience is actually like, to that spectrum that you're naming.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And again, because I don't know the science behind it, but it just has always made sense to me that of course there would be this spectrum of experience.
Sure.
And why are there boxes? Why does someone have to be this or that when there's this, beautiful box of 64 crayons that we can experience? So anyway, I feel a little bit, I'm uneducated in asking that question. I don't even really know that I asked a question. I just sort of put there's this thing that I've been curious about, and you have this specific perspective. It also happened to be married. What does your husband do? Tell me again.
He basically passed the patent bar. So he works on patent law for a biotech company. So like the COVID vaccine, he worked on the lipid nanoparticle delivery system that made the Moderna virus vaccine work, which is very exciting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But I was just going to say about that, going back to something, if you really, I didn't understand this until I married my husband. Biology has all kinds of weird, hacky solutions for stuff. I mean, look at menstruation. You've got the problem in the uterus where you've got to eject an egg once a month. And what is the solution that we came to with that? Shed the entire lining of the uterus and bleed a ton. And it works. But that's not the best design in the entire world. And the way I perceive what happened to me is it's not normal for natal males to be going through puberty and thinking I should have breasts right now. My chest feels very, very strange. Or to just feel so dysphoric and freaked out by the idea of having a penis. And when you're sitting there having crushes on boys, to think this would be great, but this really needs to be a vagina to feel correct to me, to the point that I just avoided sex until I got vaginoplasty many years later. So I think there's some mismatch in our mind and our bodies, and there's just some inefficient thing that's going on. I don't know if it's a feminization of the brain or some way that testosterone just doesn't agree with this, but there's something fundamentally biological in nature that happened to me.
Well, what I love is that you're navigating your way through, and you found so many ways to create a beautiful life for yourself and to be in connection and to share your work and also be vulnerable and name like that there's a cost to that. I mean, I think on some level, many of us can relate to this piece around the work that we do. There's a cost.
Yeah.
And checking in with ourselves around like, well, okay, so what do I really want? What cost am I choosing here? Anyway, so again, coming back to that piece that you said earlier of like making the best of our choices.
It's a very high cost. I mean, having lost my family, that is massive.
Yeah.
It's like all the pain of being trans is bad, but yet every year, like Christmas, Thanksgiving, I mean, it's brutal. It is, like I've got a colleague that's Jewish and she was writing me wanting to meet on Christmas because she doesn't celebrate. And I'm like, sure, I'm not doing anything. I don't have anyone. So it's, I think about the cost that it took for me to be myself authentically, which isn't just, taking HRT. It's been having my face taken apart. It's been having my body taken apart. It's been losing my family. It's been, losing touch with most of the people I grew up with. It's been, again, now dealing with constant abuse on the internet from J.K. Rowling. It's just exhausting. But there's this inch of us that's just authentic and real. And I know firsthand the cost of compromising that and pretending to be something that I'm not.
Yeah.
And I just, it's like that integrity in who I am. I don't have anything that's more precious to me than that. So there's no choice.
Yeah. I'm just sitting with that. The cost in giving up the integrity, like that's not a choice you're willing to make.
No.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I want to be mindful of your time, but I'm wondering for you as we move to closing, I'm wondering if there's anything else that, is on your heart or that you'd like to share with our listeners.
I feel like I've overshared so much, but I guess I would just say, like, I understand this is a hot topic right now and just ask people to take a breath and understand this is a very difficult political climate for trans people, and any kindness you can show us in this moment, it will be remembered forever.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Brianna, for showing up and using your voice and sharing with our community your story and how we can, show up as humans and recognize everyone's humanity. It's so valuable and really appreciate you.
Thanks for inviting me.
And I always, at the end, if folks would like to be in contact with your work and the things that you're doing, can you share with listeners where they can find you?
Easy to find me on Twitter. I'm just Brianna Wu there. If you are interested in my show, I do one called Dollcast with 3 other pretty normal trans women. We're kind of trying to navigate some more moderate politics. And maybe by the time this comes out, my new show with a major media network will be announced. So you can see me there maybe.
Awesome. I love it. And actually, there was, I don't know if this was a comment on your YouTube, but a gentleman left a comment that I thought might land for people or might help open some minds.
Sure.
There was a listener, and I'll cut it a little bit, but he says, "Hello, I'm a first-time listener. This is to your YouTube."
Dollcast. Doll is slang for trans women that are feminine. I didn't come up with that. I think it's cringe, but that's the slang.
So this gentleman says, "Hello, I'm a first-time listener. I'm not trans. I'm a cis hetero guy. And while I've had quite a few trans friends and colleagues, I'm definitely not in any spaces where trans issues and ideas are being discussed or debated." And I think there's probably a lot of people, this is cut to Emily saying this, there's probably a lot of people that could identify like that. Like, I feel like I've got an open mind, but I'm just not in spaces where a lot of these conversations are taking place. And so I really appreciate, and I've found myself seeking out more, podcasts and things like that to just educate myself a bit more. So he says, "So I'm finding this episode to be super interesting and eye-opening. Like if I've wandered into a 400 level university course and I feel I didn't know existed. Anyway, I'm still processing so many paradigm shattering ideas that transitioning isn't right for every trans person, that there's too much emphasis on external validation." Like he just starts naming all these topics that y'all are talking about on this Dollcast. So I appreciate, again, the work that you're doing, bringing these conversations to many of us who, would like to know and be more educated. and also are not generally in spaces where a lot of these conversations are taking place. So I just want to name that for any listeners who would like to educate yourself a little bit more and see some different perspectives, that Brianna's work does that.
I mean, I love my co-hosts. It is, please understand, from my point of view, I never thought I would get to sit around just have girl chat with people like at a Starbucks. Like that was a dream for me growing up. And the fact that I get to do a show now, not just with the girl chat, but, like 3 other really feminine, normal trans women. And most of the show was us talking about just normal stuff like relationships, marriage, hair, career, fashion, like just normal stuff that normal women are dealing with, right? Like how do you deal with being a public figure? And I think it is so valuable, especially with all these really negative stereotypes out there of what trans women are, to just show like, look, we're fairly normal women that you wouldn't blink at if you walked past us in a restaurant having lunch together. So that's what I'm really proud of with the show.
And I feel like I probably need to watch more just because I feel like y'all probably have some hair tips I could learn from.
I don't say anything, but yeah.
You weren't gonna mention my hair today, but I'll mention it.
I didn't have time to do mine either. So
I thought it was great. I know I got your email and I was like, oh, I should have given you that extra time. We had it. But anyways, no, this has been so fun. Thank you, Brianna. And
of course.
Again, I appreciate just feeling heart connected to you and that you shared, and I'm looking forward to being more in connection with your work and getting some hair tips.
We'll bring you on the show. We'll fix it. We'll fix it for you.
Be one of those makeover shows where you can do me over. All right. Thank you, Brianna. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. As a mental health professional, your commitment to healing and growth inspires us. We at the Complex Trauma Training Center are committed to supporting you in your well-being and success. That's why we're honored to invite you to our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Running over 6 online sessions in 2025, this interactive experiential learning program is designed to support self-care and self-discovery for therapists, exploring internally, relationally, and transpersonally. CTTC faculty will welcome you into a professional community of therapists that are seeking to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. As CTTC faculty Brad Kammer says, the intent is that this program will help us not only become more effective therapists, but also love our work more. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the 2025 Space Program. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.